Welcome to the latest edition of 805 Sports Talk, and this is kind of going to be a little behind-the-scenes show. We usually do this stuff off-camera where we debate, talk about our all-area baseball team. Some of us have cast our votes, some of us haven't. Kenny, you're usually the one on top of that stuff. You send your votes in first, and that was the case this year. And looking at your ballot, not too much I disagree with, some good votes. It did kind of jump out at me a little bit seeing Jeffrey Ray at the top there. Just because we didn't have that one team or player that jumped out at us this year. You know, last year with Santa Maria making a championship run, it's a little bit easier to make a pick. This year we didn't have, you know, any deep playoff runs, no league championships. Templeton kind of dominated both baseball and softball. So Jeffrey Ray is kind of your choice for MVP. What's kind of the you know, reasoning behind that one?
He hit .407. He played steady defense, and he gave good leadership.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all you can ask for out of you know, one of your top players. I think he did it all at Lompoc. Seeing him play of the little limited that I did, you know, the one Lompoc game I think I saw this year was when Santa Maria came back early in the season, one of the first games of the season, and beat Lompoc. But looking at Jeffrey Ray's stats, you really can't argue with what he did this year. He provided a lot for that Lompoc team. I'm guessing he's one of those guys, if you ask the coach, pretty much anybody up and down that lineup, who was, you know, who brought the most value to this team, who kind of led that team. I'm thinking Jeffrey Ray would probably be the one who got the most votes cast in his favor, and I think he had a great season. Lorenzo, talk a little bit about your MVP, you know, your ballot, who you looked at, who you thought was kind of the most deserving, and where you kind of sit at right now with your MVP choice.
Well, I'm with Kenny, and I believe I have seen a little bit of Cole Knightley, but I feel like I've seen Jeffrey Ray more. And another thing too, excuse me, I don't know if you're gonna edit that out or
yeah, we'll roll with it.
Yeah, but one of the things that stuck out about Jeffrey Ray is that right away he embraced Brian Aguilar's approach, Brian Aguilar's coaching, Brian Aguilar's just style and what he wanted to do. It's hard to do when you're a senior because, I mean, you're so used to the previous regime. Well, with Ray, I mean, it was like right away. He just seemed like that he was already used to Aguilar. He already had a previous, like, established relationship with him. And another thing to take into account, Ray's had a really good sports year in general because he was actually one of the senior leaders of that Braves basketball team that had that state run. And then it continued over on the baseball field where, for a while, Lompoc was neck and neck with Templeton until San Ynez kind of came in, snuck in late. But overall, it was a really good sports season for Jeffrey Ray, and sometimes I feel like that we may not give him a lot of credit than what he deserves. Granted, there's a bevy of talented Lompoc athletes, especially in the 2018 class and on that baseball team. You had Ruben Cortez on that roster as well. You also had Justin Allen, who I think also had a terrific year, and you also have a fast riser in Oscar Rojas. But to me, Ray, head and shoulders, just, I mean, if I had really had a choice, I mean, I'm with Kenny. I mean, I would have gone with Ray as well.
Yeah, I think there are a ton of candidates, you know, across the Central Coast in our area overall, and you mentioned Lompoc. There's a lot of candidates, I think, on that team as well. You know, when I look at an MVP, my first thing is to look at, you know, what they did offensively and defensively, and it usually jumps out to me when a guy can pitch, play the field, and, you know, do well at the plate, and that's kind of what I look for this year. And there's some players who kind of jump out at you, but I don't know if there was that one guy who dominated on both ends of the field. I know Matt Sauer kind of made it easy on us over the years.
Very easy.
He was an easy one to kind of vote for MVP over the years with everything that he did at Rigetti. So he had that locked down for a little while. Ruben Cortez would probably jump out at me first with him providing pitching. Wasn't as good at the plate as Jeffrey Ray. Yeah, I think Jeffrey Ray also provided a lot of value with his base running. I know he's a good base runner. He could swipe some bags. One of those guys who's almost always in scoring position, so I think that's a big key as well. I think, Lorenzo, you mentioned Cole Knightley. He's kind of one of those guys that's always in the back of your mind when you're thinking about an MVP. He provides a lot for San Ynez. He hit over 400 as well, but he's also kind of their closer, reliever type guy. Under 2 ERA, 25 innings pitched. So I like to look at those guys who can kind of do both things on the field, pitching and, you know, provide some offense as well. So I think Cole Knightley was one of those guys.
When we really think about it, I kind of feel like that this 2018 group, the top players on the baseball diamond, it really is a very unselfish group, because you have a lot of these guys having to be asked to play different positions. I mean, you mentioned Knightley being not only a top hitter but also a closer. That was some of the elements that I saw out of him during the brief time I managed to watch a San Ynez game. One other guy who may not be a household name, but I got a chance to talk to him for a while, Noah Randolph of Cabrillo. I mean, he was considered a favorite among John Osborne because of the fact that he was counted on for pitching, but also counted on to play the infield. And then Ruben Cortez, Jeffrey Ray, Justin Allen. So, truthfully, I mean, if you're an area baseball coach, I mean, you probably had a lot of joy coaching these guys, knowing that regardless of where you put them, they weren't going to gripe about it.
Yeah, I think one guy we haven't mentioned yet who did that as well was Trevor Garcia at Santa Maria. And I think what hurt him the most this year was kind of the lack of team success. Santa Maria was just on the outside of the playoffs this year, but, he was consistent at the plate. I think according to Santa Maria stats, he had 27 RBIs, also scored 27 runs. That's pretty much unheard of. I don't have his pitching stats, but he had some big performances on the hill for the Saints. Struck out a dozen plus against Morro Bay. I think he did get knocked a little bit for his performance against Cabrillo. I think Cabrillo touched him up a little bit earlier in the season, and that turned out to be, kind of a costly loss, with Cabrillo ending up making the playoffs ahead of Santa Maria by a spot. But I think Trevor Garcia, if we would have gone to the start of the year, he probably would have been one of the front runners. Jaden Libertis over at Rigetti, him and Trevor Garcia are good friends. I liked what he did this year. He was somehow, it's kind of weird that Libertis is unheralded, but we didn't talk about him a whole lot this year. But he put together a really solid season, and some people were kind of questioning if he was going to have that consistency this year to kind of lead the way for Rigetti, and he did put together a really solid season. I think he swiped over 15 bags this year, hit over 320, scored a lot of runs, drove in some runs. Him and RJ Clayton pretty much provided a big bulk of that Rigetti offense this year. I think Jaden Libertis had a good season, and interesting note on him, we're kind of waiting to see if he does end up getting drafted this year. Haven't heard his name called yet, but the draft is still going on right now. I think we're at this point in about round 30, so he's probably anxious about all that. He's not too concerned with all area team when he might be getting drafted by a major league club, but I think he had a kind of an underrated season this year.
2 years in a row for a Rigetti high guy if they get drafted. So.
Yeah, and then St. Joseph is a team kind of like Lompoc, where I think they have a bunch of guys that could kind of be in that mix for MVP honors. If you ask Cody Smith, who do you think was your most valuable guy this year, he'd probably have a hard time picking someone out.
I think he would. Yeah.
I think Isaac Baez was huge on the mound this year, and then you have a guy like Zach Trevino, who might have been more effective on the mound, winning 7 games, I think throwing 6 shutouts, something like that. They're both in the mix. And then another kind of overlooked guy is Dominic Partita. He's been so consistent. I don't know. It seems like he's been on varsity at St. Joseph baseball for like 6 years, but he's been so consistent over there at second base. I think he hit near 400. He's probably going to be playing 4-year baseball somewhere next year, so he's one of those guys. And then, of course, Zach Morris as well. He had a huge offensive season, kind of that big slugger that St. Joseph really needed this year. I think he was over 400 or right at 400 before that playoff loss to Summit. I think he ended up hitting 389 after going like 0 for against Summit. So I think Zach Morris is one of those like 4 guys.
One of the weirdest games I've ever seen at St. Joseph Summit.
Yeah, and that's interesting we bring that game up, because I think Zach Trevino took a little bit of a knock in that game. He probably would have been maybe one of the most valuable, or maybe the most valuable guy on St. Joseph. It just didn't have a great outing.
He was just pitching too low.
Yeah, and I think he had about a 2-week layoff between starts and that playoff game. So that's kind of understandable, but there's a lot that goes into who we choose for our all-area MVP and some of these players, and we do take a lot of these playoff performances into consideration. I think Baez kind of gets a boost from his one hitter in the playoffs, so he kind of got a boost in my eyes on the value that he brought to that ball club over there. So we just have a slate of guys who are kind of right there, all neck and neck for my MVP vote, who I think is going to end up with the MVP. We know Jeffrey Ray's kind of in the mix, so we'll have that out for you guys in a week or two. So we're still trying to figure all that out, so it's kind of fun. So moving on to Coach of the Year, there's a couple guys I think are the front runners right now. There's a bevy of guys that we could pick from, but I think Cody Smith at St. Joseph, 18 wins on the season, second round of the playoffs, finishing 4th in a tough Pac-8 league. Doing a good job with those seniors. I think he's in the mix. And we talk about Brian Aguilar coming into Lompoc, taking over for Jim Allen, a guy who spent so many years there, we didn't know what to expect out of Lompoc, and they were contending for an LPL title this year. Won a playoff game. Lorenzo, talk a little bit about what your decision-making process is like in terms of Coach of the Year.
Well, I mean, Cody Smith did put together an amazing year at St. Joseph, but, I'm leaning more towards Brian Aguilar only because first-year guy, he had a senior-heavy group. I mean, yeah, he's a former Lompoc Brave, but right away it's just like he was able to get Lompoc in a position where they were challenging for the LPL title. And it's not, I mean, you can make the argument about how the LPL may be down in certain sports. I thought in baseball it was a very, very standout league, especially when you have Templeton doing well, San Ynez with its history of success, Cabrillo with its history of success as well, Santa Maria also being in the mix. So, I mean, I tend to judge it more like just how Brian Aguilar was able to withstand that type of competition, and also like having to adjust into his role as head coach of a new team now. I know he's been a head coach before up north, and he was very successful there, but, this is his alma mater. And being able to establish a solid blueprint right away, I mean, to me, that to me is what speaks volumes about my selection for All Area Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I think Aguilar had a lot to deal with this year. It starts when your basketball team has a state game. You don't have all your baseball guys ready, in baseball shape, whatever that may be. That's an obstacle you got to overcome, get them ready, get everybody on the same page. And then we talk about their equipment getting stolen. That was a big story over spring. That didn't seem to faze them too much. They kind of moved past that. Maybe it boosted them a little bit with some of that community support that they received. So, he had a lot of obstacles this year, and then led Lompoc to a third place finish in a tough LPL. So, yeah, I think he's definitely, deserving of that.
I'll add one more thing. They are making much needed changes to Dan Bordery Field. I mean, there's going to be a new look field. They have the shed. Maybe there's going to be changes in the seating as well. Basically, like Brian Aguilar's bringing in something that field in general has been looking to have. So, I mean, it goes to show you Aguilar's a visionary. He's a visionary for that program.
It's an old field. Period.
It's a classic Central Coast baseball field. It's
Yes.
usually windy there. I think they do have the fence kind of I don't know if it's a permanent fence, but they got the windscreen up, so that's good that they are getting some advancements there. It's always it's one of those, I don't know if it's legendary, but it's always a field you remember playing at.
I can't sit in those stands with fear that it might break. And it might fall. Yeah.
I didn't spend the whole game in the stands when I covered their wild card win.
Yeah, I usually just like stand in the side, or I'm inside that shed, but it's definitely going to be a sight to see when you see a new look baseball field, especially that field in general. I mean, we talk about the stands, the press box. Well, Aguilar wants the field to be spruced up as well, and it's going to bring even more enthusiasm for a younger generation of Brave baseball players. And there's actually a long history of talented players from a Lompoc High baseball uniform. I mean, Ryan Church is one.
Yeah, I think Lompoc has a storied, baseball history. I think St. Joseph has one that matches it, maybe right at the same point. And Cody Smith is a St. Joseph grad, and I like what he's done over there at St. Joseph. I think he had 13 seniors this year, so I think you do have some expectations to make that season count when you do have 13 seasons. So I don't know who I would pick between those two. I think Warren Dickey kind of gets overlooked a little bit. He took that San Ynez team to a second place finish in LPL play. He's just so consistent. We kind of expect San Ynez to be either first or second in the LPL, so we kind of expect Warren Dickey's teams to do well over there. So I think he's overlooked a little bit with what he's done this year, but I think those three guys are kind of in the mix for it. I'll do some more research and kind of figure out if I think there's another one out there who did a really solid year.
And remember, in San Ynez, like when they win 1-0, Warren Dickey's going to tell you it's a San Ynez blowout.
What I liked about what Cody Smith accomplished was they were so up and down last year. I mean, they looked like it was like a team that had some good parts, but they couldn't quite put the puzzle all together. They won 10 games period last year, and with pretty much the same guys, they won one more league game this year than they won games period last season. And their last series, their first game was almost like, it was really a de facto playing game to get into the playoffs. They had to win at least one game against Rio Grande, as it turned out, to get that spot, and they did. They came through under his coaching. They came through when they needed to most. So that was a big, that counted a lot with me.
Yeah, I think his season, and I think his whole tenure there so far has kind of been overlooked. They really needed a steadying influence there, and he's kind of provided that. I think they had Rich Partita.
They had some turnover there for a while.
I think Jimmy Dodo's coached like in 13, and then they brought a coach in. Won't kind of go over that, and he was left just before the season or right at the start of the season. Rich Partita came and coached a year, and then Cody Smith came in, and he's been there ever since. I think 4 straight, he came in with the senior group when they were freshmen, so 4 straight seasons with him. I think 2 playoff appearances, and it seems like they have been found some consistency this year, and that was one of the bigger games of the year.
This was sort of like the former Desiree Dominguez's situation at Rigetti. I think it was, as far as the turnover, she inherited a mess as far as with all the turnover and so forth, and he was pretty much the same thing. It was a mess over there with all the turnover, and not necessarily the talent level, but with the turnover and so forth, and he really provided a steadying influence, I think.
Yeah, they haven't had quite the success that Desiree has had over there with Rigetti's girls basketball, but Cody also teaches at the school, so I think that's a big factor. You kind of, Desiree teaches at Rigetti. They keep an eye on those kids, build a bond with those kids, and you kind of see it play out on the basketball court or the baseball field. So I think, he's done a great job there, and I think that goes, without saying, for a lot of these coaches. They come in, they teach at these schools, and they provide, a lot more than just coaching for these kids. So I think Cody Smith has done that, Brian Aguilar's doing that, Desiree Hitch has done that. So I think there's a lot of good coaches in our area that do teaching and coaching, so that's good to see, and I think Cody Smith is exemplary of that. So moving away from baseball, we got to get into the FCA game that happened over the weekend in Atascadero. We do hate when it's up north over there, so far from us. It makes it difficult to cover, but our south team still practices over here. Lorenzo, you spent last week doing some preview stories. We know Cabrillo just had 2 guys in it. Lompoc usually has a large contingent. We were excited that Toa Taua had agreed to play in the All-Star Game. Some of these kids who have D1 commitments don't always, want to play in the All-Star Game. But it seemed like Toa was kind of excited for it, wanted to play, said he was itching to get back on the field. And then, game time comes. Even before game time, Toa wasn't at the game. Can you kind of break down what's happened since? We know Toa didn't show up. Andrew Jones kind of had to step in, apologize, because, people do look forward to this game. They look forward to these guys playing. Toa Taua isn't just, some run-in-the-mill guy who's playing his last game. This is probably the premier athlete, especially on football, in the area. He was playing in this game. People got excited, and then he didn't show up. Can you kind of break down this whole story for us?
Let me start by saying this. Andrew Jones and even Claudia Terrones has spent the last few days apologizing to me, apologizing to the San Maria Times, and I commend them for that. Now, I've had a hard time trying to digest all this and try to find the right words, but I will say this. Toa Taua, I know that he's a young guy, he's going to make mistakes, but I think of the 8 to 9-year-old kid who was looking forward to seeing Toa play one more time, and then to say at the last minute, oh, he's not playing, he decided to spend time at a graduation party with his family. It's kind of a difficult thing to kind of swallow to explain to that kid, and that was something that Andrew Jones even mentioned as well, because he remembered being 8, 9 years old, hearing about Napoleon Kaufman playing one more All-Star game. His dad told him, "We're gonna go in our truck and we're gonna watch Napoleon Kaufman play." This is almost like the equivalent of even like a Mark Brunell at the last minute deciding not to play, or any other prominent athlete we've seen from this area at the last minute deciding not to play as well. Now, I'll end by saying this. I really hope that we don't remember the Toa Taua who at the last minute decided to not play in the FCA All Star Game. I hope that in the end of the day, we can remember the Toa Taua who ran people over, the Toa Taua who had those big games against Arroyo Grande, against Camarillo in the playoffs, against San Ynez, especially this past season, which was one of the harder games Lompoc had played against. I hope that that's the Toa Taua that we remember, and not the one who at the last minute decided that he didn't want to play in one more game, especially with some of his his teammates that he grew up with and some of the guys he went against. So, I mean, that's just my 2 cents on there.
Yeah, I think I feel a couple ways about it. First, I will say it is an all-star game, so, it's not a Super Bowl, it's not a playoff game or anything like that. So, we got to, maybe it's not the biggest deal in the world, but at the same time, I think, that you got to figure out a way to handle this where this doesn't happen. If you think, there's a possibility that you might not end up playing, just, don't commit, stay away from it. Say, this is during graduation, I love my family, I want to spend some time before, he's probably going to be going away to Nevada in a couple weeks here, you want to stay home, just handle it where, take a minute, figure out what you want to do, stick to that plan and stick with it. Don't have, commit to it and then not end up playing. Another thing is that I want to say is that, this kid has had a lot of pressure to play, to perform, to show up. He's been, he was touchdown Toa when he was like 8, 9, 10 years old. He's always had this kind of, I don't know if it's a reputation. He's had to perform a lot. He's had a reputation to kind of impress a lot of people, always put on a show. So maybe he wanted to take a minute and take a Saturday, one of his last Saturdays before graduation, and spend it with his family, enjoy his graduation party. We don't know, he's finally just said, I want to stay home, I don't want to play. Maybe he felt he was pressured into playing, so he kind of,
Jones, everything from my Jones was very straightforward with me, and he had told me that, just the timing of it, that's not the good luck on Toa Taua's part, and that's what he said in the story. The timing of it wasn't great. If this was a Tuesday and Wednesday and Toa says, you know what, coach, I don't want to play, my family's coming over, we're having a graduation party, then I can understand. But see, that decision was made on Saturday. That's why Jones was very straightforward and very blunt about, all this happening. And I'll also, I meant to say this earlier, but on our end, we had a story that basically said Toa Taua is itching to play. Unfortunately, we were in a situation at the San Maria Times where we had to do a follow-up story. It was a situation we didn't want to be in, but you know what? Hey, we felt that it was the right thing to do.
I don't blame anybody for deciding that they don't want to play in an all-star game, but do let people know in advance if you're not going to.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things that where you're a name like Toa Taua, you've done so much to kind of get this attention on you that you got to kind of follow up with it, and people are going to be interested in what you're doing. You're an
potential
attraction.
headline player.
Mm-hmm. So you got to handle it so it kind of comes with the territory.
To be blunt, it might have been different if somebody who figured to be a second or third not get much playing time.
You also have to feel.
But he was a headliner, even at high school. It is at the high school level that does make a difference.
You almost have to feel for the people who put together the FCA All Star Football program the day of the game, as well.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for everybody, but I'm not going to remember Toa for skipping out on the FCA All Star Game. We'll remember it, but he had a great career here, 4 years on varsity. Didn't end up winning that championship. We thought he would get one, but I think he had a great career here, and I'm sure it'll be one of those learning moments. I don't think Nevada will care about it too much.
That's what Andrew Jones also said, that he hopes that in the end this is a learning moment on Toa's end, a learning moment even on the family's end as well. And we'll continue to follow his career at Nevada.
Yeah, hopefully he has a big career there.
Yeah, we're still wishing the best for him, but it would have been nice to see him play, and I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to see Toa Taua play one last game on the Central Coast.
And again, I commend Andrew Jones, I commend Claudia Torres, I commend to the Lompoc High people I've talked to about how sincere they were. They didn't want us to think we were misled, that sort of thing. So I do commend them for that.
All right, and looking at the FCA game as a whole, the Southside won this year, 28-14. Seemed like it was a good game. Dino Maldonado had a great game. Shamar Savage and Gabe Prendergast seemed to provide some challenges for that North team offense, with the South winning 28-14 over there in Atascadero. So how do we think 8 years in, this is the 8th annual FCA All-Star Game, the game is doing? Seemed like there was some chippiness. I don't even think they were able to play the full game because of some chippiness. Seems like they do attract a lot of people are interested in it. Lorenzo, starting with you, how do you think the FCA's All-Star Game is doing 8 years in? Would you like to see any changes? Do you think there can be any improvements to the game so far?
Well, it's hard for me to say it was a great game when I heard about the number of fights that happened and the fact that it ended pretty early. But, You know, it is a good format because you have SLO County going against Santa Barbara County. I mean, I can still think back to the Kiwanis All-Star Game. That was when you had only literally like Santa Barbara County playing against one another. You had Lompoc, San Ynez, Cabrillo, Santa Maria, the Santa Maria schools going against like kids from Dos Pebbles, Bishop Diego, Santa Barbara High. And I mean, that All-Star Game, I guess, ultimately got disorganized. Well, I mean, unfortunately, when you have a game where there's multiple fights, I mean, it does put it at risk of being discontinued. And I believe you were telling me a story, Kenny, that SLO County had an All-Star Game that just folded.
Yeah, a veteran official in town did tell me that a while ago that they discontinued the San Luis Obispo County All-Star Game because of that type of thing. I think crowd-wise, attendance-wise, the game does fine. So if they can avoid the fights, I think the future of the game will be fine. If it keeps going down that route that it did last Saturday night, to be honest, I see it being discontinued. Nobody wants to put up with that. Ultimately, at the end.
I'm gonna say this because we know like our area teams are going into the central section. How is this format now gonna work? I mean, are you now going to be in a situation where SLO County may have an All-Star Game against Kern County talent, or SLO County goes against Fresno County?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I did not think of that.
Because you already have the city county All-Star Game, which is one of the big All-Star games in Fresno. You also have the Tulare Kings County All-Star Game, which is strictly like Hanford, Lemoore, Tulare, all those, and then you also have Bakersfield with their games as well. But how is this going to work? Where now you have the area teams going into the central section, are you going to put them in all-star games where they're going against them?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of that. I don't know how it will affect them. I'm guessing the format would still change the same. I know there's a lot of fundraising involved for this game. I know it's good for these football programs and the entire athletic departments for the schools that do play in these games. So I think there's probably too much money at stake to change the format, to disband it at this point. From what I hear, it raises a lot of money with, I guess they do a raffle, and
they auction off items as well.
I think they split the gate somehow as well. So I know a lot of these schools that are playing in it make some money off of it. I know that. So I think there's just too much money involved for it to go away at this point, or for schools to kind of say we're going to play in a different game or not playing it because we're in different sections now. So I think I'd be surprised if the format does change, but I know that this does make a lot of fun.
I don't think the format will change.
Yeah.
I think we'll stay the same.
I think it will be a little different for these teams because they may not play each other or communicate as much because they're not in the same leagues anymore. So it could be a little different vibe to it. But
I think the vibe will be different.
Who's to say too, like maybe somebody down the road creates an All-Star Game where you have SLO County going against 559 and 661.
Yeah, I think the good thing about this one is that we are pretty close to each other. There isn't that much travel involved. I mean, Atascadero to like Lompoc or San Ynez or Paso Robles to one of those schools, probably the furthest distance. Once you start going, Fresno and Kern County and all that stuff, that's some major distance between those schools. So I don't know if they'll change it to that, but I think it's convenient. It's fun. I'm glad they put it on. It's fun to cover. When we do go to it, it's fun to cover. It's fun to watch, and I think a lot of the kids do enjoy playing it. And it does have kind of like that bowl game feel to it, where they have some festivities. The kids do feel pretty special playing an All-Star Game, and not everyone gets to play in it. So I think the kids do enjoy it, and it seems like a lot of people come out for it.
And one of the best things about an All-Star Game is, say you played at a team that went 0-10, you could finally walk out your senior year and say, I finally won my last game.
Frankly, I think the fights were a lot worse than Toa Taua pulling out.
Yeah.
The last minute.
That's pretty big.
The fights, I mean, I don't think it will this time, but it could potentially put the very nature of the game. I mean, these players need to think about, I mean, the game raises a lot of money to help programs that they're leaving, but programs at their alma maters, it's helping other people. So I think I know it's football, but you need to put maybe the temptation to settle old scores or whatever it is aside.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is the first time that I've heard of any real trouble at one of these, and hopefully it'll be the last.
one last gripe. I think having it on the same night as the rodeo is also kind of crucial. I know
Yeah.
a lot of people go to the rodeo. We like covering the rodeo, so when you have that going on the same night and the game's all the way in Atascadero, it makes it hard to cover both games, to go. You know, a lot of people want to go to the rodeo. A lot of people want to go to the All-Star Game, and they can't do both. I know last year, I think we were in both last year they were both in Santa Maria, the rodeo and the All-Star Game, and then we had Santa Maria's baseball team was playing in Riverside for a baseball championship. So there's just a whole lot going on that weekend. So maybe have it the weekend before. I don't know.
frankly wish they would have it at a different time,
Yeah.
maybe a week or two later than they do.
As it is, as Elliot Stern had in his story, there was a Super Bowl champion at the Elks Rodeo, Bear Pasco, a guy I used to cover.
Oh yeah, Bear Pasco, the former Fresno State guy, was in the rodeo. So yeah, I know it's in a tough spot for those guys with, you know, kids graduating, having graduation. They kind of got to have it that weekend, but I hope they can figure out something where it's not on the same night as the rodeo. I know that's tough for people who want to go to both or participate in both. So we'll see if they can maybe adjust that at some point. I don't know if it's hurting their bottom line too much at this point. One last topic is Karlos Balderas. Kenny met up with him on Tuesday. Has a big fight coming up at Staples Center on Saturday night. Should be a fun event. You know, on the undercard of the Abner Mars Leo Santa Cruz fight, so that's cool. One of his I think another big fight for him. Fighting at the Staples Center is a big deal. You talked to Karlos on Tuesday, Kenny. What's his vibe right now? How's he feeling? Is he preparing for his opponent, or is he focusing on his own game plan? What's kind of his mentality right now?
Oh, I think pretty much not quite, but almost strictly his own game plan. He said he's not. He doesn't even concern himself with learning a lot about the opponent until maybe he said he's just now starting to learn about some of the characteristics of the opponent. I think he's much more, and it's worked for him. I think he's much more concerned with his own game plan. And I thought it was interesting. He did make an adjustment, I guess, before. He said he just would try to go after people and try to put them out as quickly as possible. And then his dad and his promoter and his trainer also, who's his uncle, also fostered this, saying, hey, you need to pace yourself more. And I think that stuck with Karlos. I think that made an impression. And he is going to, if this goes the distance, it will be longer than he's ever fought before in professional bout. This one's scheduled for 6. His furthest was 4. He is fighting an opponent with a winning record, but Karlos has already beaten somebody with a winning record. His previous opponent, I think was 4-1 going into it, and it was his first fight that was not some sort of knockout, but Karlos did win a unanimous decision at the Don Haskins Convention Center in El Paso, his last fight.
Yeah, so that's a 6-rounder for Karlos, like you mentioned, Kenny. That's going to be a tough one for him. If it does go the distance, I think he has already 3 knockouts in his 4 victories, something like that. So he's trying to go 5-0 in his pro career, the former Olympian. So that's Saturday night in Los Angeles on Staples Center.
I think he could not be off to a better start. So we'll see if he can keep it rolling.
Yeah, I know the main card will be broadcast on Showtime. I don't know if they are going to be able to pick up his bout on Showtime, but if you do want to go down to Staples Center and check him out, you know, go right ahead that Saturday night. It should be a lot of fun to see.
Buffalo Wild Wings also.
Buffalo Wild Wings.
Go to Buffalo Wild Wings if you want. But yeah, we'll see how Karlos does this weekend. I know a lot of people here in Santa Maria are hoping for another victory and a 5-0 start for his pro career. Also, Jose's fighting as well. Jose Balderas, the younger Balderas brother, as well.
He's 2-0. He hasn't lost either.
2 knockouts for Jose as well. So yeah, we'll have some coverage on that this weekend. Got some Little League games going on this weekend as well. The Lompoc Championship, Santa Maria Championships all going down this weekend. So we'll have coverage on all that good stuff. And we'll see you guys next week on 805 Sports Talk.
Thank you.